welcome to pursuing successful climate action in red states. Please note the emphasis on the word pursuing. I'm Margie Lynch. I chair the Jackson Hole Climate Action Collective, which is a local advocacy organization here in Jackson, all volunteer. And I wanted to start by talking about the genesis of the idea for this session. And that is, again, in last year's Mountain Town event, which was in Fabulous Vale, Colorado. All sorts of great content. There was a contingent of about 12 folks from Jackson, and we sat in session after session with Colorado panelists listening to the amazing things that were happening, and we would kind of look at each other and be like, we can't do that. That sounds awesome. No. And so here's how I've graphically represented it. Colorado is like you're ripping the Roy on a blue trail. Things are easy and smooth and awesome. And then we have some red states in the region. I've highlighted a few here where you're dying, like trying to get to the top. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you have to get off your bike and walk, and sometimes you crash. So I wanted to set expectations for this session today. First, this is a discussion, this is a conversation. We have three fabulous red state panelists here. A Wyoming state legislator, he's a Republican. A representative from a statewide advocacy organization here. I'm sorry, Andrew Byron. I'm going to have people introduce themselves. Andrew Byron, a Republican state representative in Wyoming representing Jackson. We're super thrilled to have him. Jonathan Williams, who goes by JW, who works for Wyoming Outdoor Council, which is a statewide advocacy organization. And Courtney Hamilton, who's a city councilor for the city of Ketchum. And I wanted to just manage expectations here. When I was talking to Chris Steinkamp from Mountain Towns 2030, as I was, developing the session and wanted to get his input, and he said, "Great, you're gonna help people understand how they can get legislation passed in red states." And I said, "No, we certainly are not going to be talking about adopting legislation." Now, is it outside the purview of possibility? Of course it's not. We think that could, but just to realistically set expectations, we're here to have a discussion, to talk about issues. We're going to offer our perspectives. We think we do have some examples to point to that will support you all in our work. We don't claim to have all of the answers. So, and we want to very much engage you all in the conversation. This is intended to be a conversation where we kind of seed it, but then we want to hear your questions and your comments. So the idea is we'll probably cover some questions I have for the first 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have a back and forth with you all, and hopefully that'll be a great way to wrap up today's session. So I have some questions I'm going to kick off with, and as I ask them, if you all, the first time you talk, if you could maybe introduce yourselves a little bit and share with the crowd a little bit about yourselves. And I'm mindful of the fact we're building on a really interesting and provoking session from this morning, Benji Backer, where he talked about nonpartisanship. And I think you're going to notice we're going to be touching on some of the same themes. The first question out of my mouth, you're going to be like, wait, we talked about that this morning. I think the perspective these folks will bring to that will be a little bit different. Again, hyper-local, focused on our specific circumstances in our red states. So I guess I'll kick off with that. Wyoming and Idaho are notably conservative states, arguably the most conservative in the United States of America. And the term climate change is a live wire. We talked about that this morning, and a hot button for many people in positions of power and many people who aren't in positions of power for that matter. And I would love for each of you to kind of speak to how we can speak about climate change and the need to address it in terms, and I don't just mean words, I mean like concepts, et cetera, that will really resonate across the political spectrum. And we haven't talked about how we're going to proceed with order. Maybe, Courtney, are you okay if I start with you and we work this way?
Sure.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Great. I'm Courtney Hamilton. I am a city council member from Ketchum, Idaho, and that's my side job. And my day job is I work for Idaho Conservation League. So I work in conservation throughout my day, and then I try to make change at night in the council chambers. I previously worked in green building as well, so I have kind of an interesting and varied background in terms of my interest in and passion for climate change and bringing change to Idaho. I was born and raised in the Wood River Valley, where Ketchum is. Ketchum is home to Sun Valley Resort. If any of you don't know, that's kind of how we pinpoint where Ketchum is, and how you might know it. But I'm a fifth-generation Idahoan, so my family has been there for a really long time. They span a really wide range of the political spectrum, and they all are very passionate about Idaho. And so I think it's always fun to kind of bring these issues back to the fact that we all really care about Idaho, and how can we kind of make that a part of the conversation.
Yeah. Great. JW, any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with an introduction. I'm Jonathan Williams. Folks call me JW. He, him, his pronouns, and I'm living right now in Lander, Wyoming, and work for the Wyoming Outdoor Council. And for those of you who aren't aware, the Outdoor Council is a statewide organization here in Wyoming. We're a nonprofit, and we do conservation work and have a water, air, wildlife, climate portfolio, and also have a really robust tribal conservation program that's really exciting. And my role uniquely there is focusing on climate and energy policy and community engagement. And that's been really interesting in a very conservative state. And I often engage with rural communities and less resourced communities and try to have conversations, something about climate change, but also more specifically to where their needs and interests are.
Yeah, any particular concepts that you've found really engage the interest of people when you're, trying to lay the foundation for, climate work?
Yeah, I'd say, I think what's interesting is I think as conservationists or environmentalists or climate advocates, we can sometimes be our own worst enemies when we are in a red state. And what I mean by that is I've not been to any community where there are absolutely zero people interested in global warming or climate policy or seeing positive change or investment in their community. And I think oftentimes we go to this default phrase of like nothing can happen at the state legislature or nothing could happen at the local level, and that is just not true. And everywhere I've gone, there are champions that are there. And I think it is about showing up and asking people to articulate their values that they have. Of like, what do they care about that place? And then where can we find some nexus to climate emissions, to resilience, and go from there? And I think when I've shown up and started to start from a point of listening to needs and problems and then try to work with them to identify possible solutions, the conversation's gone so much further. And I would just encourage you all, as you're having those conversations, to show up and to invite people to that table with you. And it doesn't mean you need to hide your political beliefs, but it actually doesn't have to be this big political conversation. And it can just be about their issues and their perspectives and their stories. And then you can help shape a community narrative out of that. You talk to enough people and you're like, wow, I keep hearing this thing of everyone in this town is really concerned about water quality or how we're having prolonged drought. And there's something there and people really care about it. Let's continue to tease that out in other spaces. And so that's where I'd at least start on that front.
Great. Andrew.
J-Dub, thank you. That was great. My name is Andrew Byron. I represent House District 22, which, if you look at a map, is plus or minus South Teton County, North Lincoln County. And I've lived here my whole life. Honored to be on this panel. Not only do I wear a hat as a legislator, but I also have a long history in the ski industry, in the outfitting industry, on rivers. Obviously, many of us live in mountain towns and generally outside, so this is really close to home. I was just thinking through my introduction, and in the Wyoming State House, we have 62 members. We have 57 Republicans and 5 Democrats, no independents. So this is the first time I've been in a room speaking in front of a lot of people where I am by far the minority, and I love it. So, it's easy, right? It's easy. You're going to Cheyenne, you're a Republican, you're coming from Teton County, which can have its issues, but you're going to go fight for good things. Quickly labels become more prevalent, and we begin to have, we all get backed into a corner down there. You're not conservative enough. You don't wear a big enough cowboy hat. You don't own any cows. Oh my gosh, you've Nordic skied before. All the things you could imagine come into it. But I think what's really important, and how I apply some of these thoughts of climate change, and I ran unsuccessfully for county commissioner in 2018. I remember a forum saying, I was like, I got to get this monkey off my back. I'm a Republican, and I believe in climate change, and the room kind of was really quiet. And I thank Commissioner Newcomb, who's here, who beat me, because now I don't have to be on the commission. I get to go to Cheyenne. So, but I think that was a really pivotal moment in my political career, because I felt comfortable saying that. And where we got to this conversation a few weeks ago when we were talking about this panel is, where does climate change, how did it affect me? Well, I was a fishing guide for 20 years, so when I put my feet in the water and the water's too warm to fish, that's climate change. When we have a delayed ski season because of all the different factors, that's climate change. When we have an extended ski season because some of the best snow falls after the ski season's over, that's climate change. But how that applies to my life in Cheyenne is, how do I talk to the other 61 members about this topic, but how do I apply it to them? And J-Dub talked about this a little bit, but I need to know what the 61 members do professionally. So if I'm going to go try to lobby on a bill, if that person, the representative, even on the Senate side, the senator, is in agriculture, I need to quickly do some research before I run down the hallway, because we don't have staff in Cheyenne, and I need to tell them, hey, how does this apply to your rangeland? How does this bill adversely or positively affect the flows in your river? Because they're, especially, I'm going to talk about agriculture here, they care about their cows and their sheep. We care about our ski season. We care about the environmental impacts we're making by recreating. We care about all these things. But how I bring climate change back into my political sphere is, I need to talk to them about what applies to them. One gentleman on the east side of the state's a helicopter pilot. How does it apply to you? He is fascinating. He's much larger than I am, loves to burn Jet A, but is very fascinated about electric helicopters. You can bring these conversations together if you just have those conversations. So I think it's really important in a red state, if you don't always have the opportunity when you're walking into these conversations, but to know your audience and just be able to apply those conversations to where it might hit home with them, because you also want them to apply it to where it might hit home to you. So.
Yeah, I love that, and I think it's a really great lead into the next question I wanted to pose, which is about relationships, because our states are fundamentally very small. I think Montanans would arguably say that as well. Utah's bigger, Colorado's bigger, but I'd be curious to hear from each of you what an example of a relationship is that you found to be especially valuable in your climate action work, and what tips you can offer for building the types of relationships and connections that will support success in advancing climate action. I think Andrew has led us into that, so maybe I'll start with the others and we'll circle back to you again. JW, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question, and the first one that comes to my mind, and maybe this is because I grew up in the church, is my favorite kind of relationship right now is like when we have potlucks and we get a bunch of people together and we have a conversation. And I remember being invited into one of those probably like 5 or 6 years ago. Kara was there, and it was at someone's house, and it was a bunch of like concerned people in Lander, Wyoming, that never thought actually anything could change in that town, but also all knew that we wanted to see something happen. And we had to work within the confines of, not a liberal town and not a well-resourced place. And it was just beautiful to connect in that really human way. And we created this like cohort of really dedicated champions of let's figure out a way to move this forward. And then like we went from there. And more, like when we can get around and invite an elected official out for coffee, which you can do in the state of Wyoming, you probably can in Idaho and Utah. These are small states. Go and just have that conversation and play the long game in that relationship find out where those interests are, and then like keep going from there. And I think we just need those human moments with one another as we're building relationships. So maybe I'll start there and then see what these two want to add.
Yeah, Courtney.
Yeah, and there's one other thing. I'm not sure exactly where it fits in. Maybe it fits into the language category of the last question that I didn't answer. But one of the things that I think is really important about making change in red states is emphasizing that climate change affects a lot of different parts of your quality of life, right? Blaine County has an amazing new climate action plan that we just adopted, and it emphasizes very heavily the triple bottom line. So we are so fortunate to be at a place where making positive climate action not only helps the planet, but it also helps the people, and it also helps your profits. So I think of it as 3 Ps, right? But your economy. The state of Idaho Land Board actually just yesterday approved their first lease on public land for a large-scale renewable energy implementation. And the reason they did that is because they have a fiduciary responsibility to get the highest dollar they can for those lands. And currently they get cents on the dollar for grazing or agriculture, but they're now going to be getting hundreds of dollars per acre for those lands, and we're getting renewable projects in response. And that had nothing to do with being good for the planet. The state of Idaho has done some crazy things where they've actually banned renewable energy creation on private property, which is a little bit counterintuitive. But so that's the political landscape that we're in. But when you look at the economy, when you look at safety and health, electric school buses are way safer for children. They're not breathing in the diesel fumes, and they're quieter, they're more comfortable. There's all these things that you don't even have to think about. You don't even have to mention climate change. You don't even have to mention the planet for it to be the right thing to do. And I think that's a really important part of this conversation, and kind of where you have to start in a red state if you're going to get anywhere, especially if you're trying to do things that involve the state level legislature. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think that's a really important part of the conversation, and it's just a reality, which is great to be in that place. We weren't in that place 5 years ago, and so it's really nice to be there now. And then in terms of relationships, I think I think of it at the political level because I'm on the city council, and we are fortunate to have a great relationship with the city of Boise, and they've been a really pioneering city on environmental activities over the last few years. And they have a geothermal district, and they have this really progressive composting program, and they have an amazing team over there that we're really lucky to have benefited from and to have a relationship with, to kind of not only ping ideas off of, but work together to unite and have these conversations with our utility, Idaho Power, which we face a very uphill battle with on renewables. But anything we can do to kind of build scale and make it a larger movement is really important. And another thing that we haven't tackled climate change on yet, but is kind of a really interesting and helpful aspect to solving any problems in red states that we've created is we've created what we call the Resort Cities Coalition. That's an Idaho-only organization of resort cities in the state of Idaho. And this was my idea. It started a few years ago, kind of actually coming out of a CAST meeting, a Colorado Association of Ski Towns meeting, where I went to a meeting, and it very similar to your experience at Mountain Towns 2030, where I was like, they're doing all of these amazing policies, and we can't do that. We're not legally allowed to do that. We're not a home rule state. We do not have control over so many things that affect our community. And a big part of the funding structure in our community is our local option tax, and that is often getting threatened at the state level. And so we kind of united these cities to have a lobbying arm at the state legislature so that we can stand up for the things that are most important to our communities, because our communities bring in a significant amount of sales tax dollars to the state, and yet the state is doing a lot of things that are threatening the existence of our communities. And so building those relationships has been an amazing asset for all of the communities involved. We have these really tiny little communities that are technically qualified as resort communities that are learning from the bigger communities. We have a sliding scale system so that all communities can participate if they want to, and we're starting to actually draft and get bills passed at the state legislature, which seemed impossible to me a few years ago. And so kind of uniting with others within your state has been really powerful for us on other issues, and I'm hopeful that maybe someday we'll start to get there on the climate work as well.
Great. Andrew, your thoughts on relationships?
Yeah, posing that question, I think that these relationships start with, two of us up here have lived it, and certainly JW as he travels around doing his work, but it starts with our campaign. It's relationships are important from our neighbors and our voters and those that might be barely outside of our district, but live in our community, live in our county, live in adjoining counties. But, it trickles up. It's our colleagues at the town and county level. It's certainly the colleagues at the state level. But then the different branches of government. We are lucky, I think, in mountain states and others, but these rural states where access is, from my experience, whether or not I'm traveling to Arizona, Colorado for different conferences or different legislative topics to have big discussions, people are there. We are a citizen legislator, so we don't have staff. Our personal phone numbers are published on the website. Some people in here might be shocked by that, but I only get 3 or 4 phone calls a session about topics. People don't show up. People don't organize like you were referring to and get to the state capitol and come lobby. Now, it's a long ways from here, right? Cheyenne's very far from Jackson, but those relationships matter. And then it trickles up from your original campaigning all the way up to the government level, the governor level, the executive branch. And certainly going in 2 years ago as a freshman, it's a bit intimidating, but you asked to meet with the governor, he says no. Well, I asked to meet with the governor, he said yes, and he needs me as much as I need him, to work on policy, whether or not it's climate oriented or agriculture, whatever it might be, taxation. So I think it's really special that we have this opportunity. And I've been shocked to I was at a Pew Charitable Trust conference down in Denver a couple years ago, and sitting next to these folks that have districts 50 times the size of mine, and they're just normal people that are people's neighbors too. And I said, well, how does it work? Can you get a hold of your governor? Can you get a hold of your representation in Washington? And we were talking about it a bit earlier. And yeah, I find ours to be quite responsive. And I hope that's similar in other states. But I would challenge anyone for those relationships. You get no, you're right back where you started. But if you get yes, you have an in. And to JW's point, it begins with a coffee maybe, or it begins with a discussion in the morning in the hallway at the Capitol, or at the town square, or at a conference like this, and just begin to stay in touch. And I think that there's real opportunity there to formulate and grow those relationships, and it's so important for all these policy discussions we're having.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing I would add in, I'm guilty of making assumptions about people. I'm working on it. We have a state energy authority in Wyoming that tends to be relatively focused on, maintaining the fossil fuel economy in our state. It's not their exclusive interest. I don't want to underserve them, but there was a program manager there that I wanted to meet with, and I called him up. He agreed to a meeting, and I said, I do my professional work in Massachusetts. You probably hate me. And he said, my dad's from Massachusetts. The Red Sox are my favorite team. And so we actually formed a bond when I assumed there wasn't one there. And I think another thing I found super important is, offering to be of assistance is a key piece of relationship building for climate action, whether it be, bringing information to a county commissioner who's too busy to dig deeply into the issue, or a state program manager. I found that to be a really important strategy, is making yourself useful. I wanted to touch a bit on an equity-related topic. It's well studied that people who contribute the least to the changing climate often carry the brunt of environmental impacts. And there can be policy environments that may overlook or even exclude these individuals. Potentially that's exacerbated in states with policy environments like ours. I am curious what strategies you all would suggest to elevate the voices of disadvantaged and underserved populations, to address barriers and direct benefits to low-income or otherwise disadvantaged populations in climate action work. Andrew, would you be willing to take that one first?
Yeah, absolutely. Uniquely, the district I represent has one of the wealthiest counties in the United States, and and towns of Wilson, Wyoming, a very desirable zip code, and it trickles down to rural Lincoln County that has, certainly inequities and poverty and people that are really struggling. So, I think that in any way, shape, or form, every single vote I take, I have to try to wear that entire hat, right? Broad hat, big hat, and think about each one of those constituents. And then beyond my boundaries, the entire state. And then obviously, I think at the end of the day, how does this impact us as citizens of the world? So, I think that as you approach these topics and in policy making, and certainly in drafting legislation and voting on legislation, more importantly, it is really important. We are lucky that a lot of those folks do have opportunities to come to reach out to us, to speak to us. But I also think I put it on my colleagues and I to do just the opposite, to be able to be open and available for them. It might not be the general means we're used to. It might not be a computer because there might not be access to a computer. So I think it is important to, it's not my favorite thing to go into the grocery store because you feel vulnerable, but certainly as soon as you serve a few terms, you begin to get recognized, good or bad, and you have signed up for that job, so you better be ready to have that discussion. So yeah, I think it's really important to be aware that when you go down that road in my shoes, you're putting yourself out there, but also know that even in communities like this, and there's studies, and we talk about it amongst local electeds all the time, there are a lot of those folks in every community, and certainly in a community like this, if you just look how the participation in the food bank and all those types of programs. So I think that as it applies to climate policy, those folks are generally very hardworking. They're here trying to also share the community we share, and it's important to be able to spend the time with them to hear their concerns and to also softly educate in a kind way. How can I represent you better? They don't always know. They might not have had civics. They might not have paid attention to civics like some of us. But ultimately, they need to know that their voice in terms of my position is equally as important as everyone's. And I hope that, and it might not always have to do with climate, but we can always tie it back in, depending on where they work, where they recreate, where they play, where they live too. So I think it's really important to know that the standard medium and the standard vessel to communicate might not that we're used to in a form like this or an email might not be easy for them. So it's really important to just be able to have those face to face and be willing to step up and have that.
Yeah. Courtney?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons from trying to do this work in red states is that it comes down to the locals, right? The local government, the local volunteers, the local participants. And the advantages of that is that we're that much closer to the people who don't have a voice at higher levels. And so, we know them through volunteer community efforts. And so it's an opportunity for us to ask people in the grocery store what they think about these things, right? And we struggle with that at the council level all the time. There's a certain type of person that comes to a council meeting. It's not the disadvantaged one. And how do you make sure that all the voices are heard? And it takes effort and it takes outreach. And I think organizations like Jonathan's who focus on grassroots advocacy, anything you can do to bring more people into the conversation and spread, what is valuable. I think, groups like Margie leads. We have a similar one in our valley called the Wood River Climate Action Coalition. They've done amazing work. It's all volunteers, and they do a really great job at trying to bring more people into the conversation. We have a local club at our high school that brings kids into the conversation. And so I think being able to do this stuff at such a local level allows you to have more voices as a part of it. And the other thing about the transition to renewable energy and trying to reduce our energy use is that it saves people money. And so there is actually more dollars available for lower income people. And so, that's obviously an outreach hurdle. And there was a session yesterday that talked a little bit about those programs. But, we're lucky to be able to have programs that can help people weatherize their homes and reduce their daily living costs, especially in places, you know, like Jackson and where I live, where the wealth discrepancy is just so massive that it really is the cost of daily life plays a huge role in people's ability to stay in our community and to participate in our democracy. And so anything we can do to kind of help reduce that and help improve the quality of people's lives, again, whether or not it has anything to do with climate change, it's just about making you more comfortable in your home. And, you know, how do we have that conversation and you know, help kind of bridge those cultural norms and find ways to bring other people in and make sure that we're including people in that conversation is, it's an ongoing struggle, I won't lie, for us, but it's something that we care about and that we're trying to do and that I think is easier to do at the local level.
JW.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think a couple of themes that I was hearing you two talk about is certainly like asking who else should be in that conversation and doing some like early, often deliberate, authentic outreach to those groups. And those are like areas that I have found really helpful. And I also want to acknowledge just how often it can feel like you fail on this front and that no one person has the silver bullet on how to do great engagement on this front. And just a quick poll, who here has tried to invite someone into like a conversation or to like a community session or to provide input that is from like a disadvantaged community or an underrepresented community and they just didn't show? Yeah. Or like you wanted to be a part of an initiative. And something that I would offer as a strategy that I think I've learned the hard way like 19 times, and I'm probably going to learn it again in another month or two, is the front end work to have someone feel like they can show up and meaningfully participate or want to participate or understand what this like white guy named John is trying to offer is actually a lot of work, and it takes a lot of intentionality. And I think that often gets overlooked of, oh, I sent the invite via email. We never heard from them. What a bummer they didn't want to come. And I think if that's your strategy, we got to go like 9 layers deeper. And like no joke, have a big conversation amongst whoever your peers are right there and then be like, are we just talking about a group that's not actually here? Let's pull them into this planning part of this. And then let's do this outreach. And then let's see how to pull them in. And I think the more we can slow that down and like approach early and then try to listen, the more success that we're going to have there. And it's going to be a challenging process, but this is like an important piece of this work.
One other thing that I just want to add to that too is that it was mentioned at some point in the last 2 days, and I'm sorry I can't remember where, but that trusted partners play a huge role in this. You know, there are certain organizations within our community that have spent years building rapport and building relationships with certain communities, and you know, helping to access those communities through those organizations makes a huge difference because they're known, they're trusted, they often speak the same language, and people don't read emails, but they do go to our free ski nights at our local ski hill, right? And maybe that's the place that you can reach them with their family, or maybe it's the local soccer club, or whatever it is. I think it's getting creative and using things that are already a part of their life to help kind of bring them into the conversation and share ways that you know, they could benefit from this work, and also, you know, listen to ways that they want to be involved in the work.
JW, I was wondering if you could tell us about the strategy Wyoming Outdoor Council, which we call WALK, is taking to climate action in our conservative state. You know, the community-based approach. You know, if you could share more about what your objective is and what kind of results you're seeing, both in terms of challenges and successes.
Yeah, this is a big question. I'll try to distill it. A lot of the work that we're doing right now, I think we broadly have the goal of like certainly engaging at both grassroots and grass tops. And on the grassroots front, a lot of kind of like if we had a perfect outcome would be to build like the human infrastructure or to support the building of the right people in the right places with the right relationships with the right knowledge, so that if there's an opportunity to advance like carbon accounting in a community, that they're more prepared for that conversation and that they then have support to actually move through some of those steps or address whatever environmental challenge that they're facing, or be able to navigate like the political system and make their voice heard. And so a lot of what we do, and this is an ongoing iterative experiment, is show up, listen, we provide some consulting, we like highlight what's going on with like big funding packages like IRA, IIJA, and how even if you're not a community that's interested in working on climate change, every community should be thinking about tax credits right now and understanding how those work, because we all have old buildings that need to be retrofitted and improved and made more comfortable. And also we'll talk policy and be like, well, here's things that will impact you, and here are avenues for you to engage. And that's been like a slow process and also really fruitful when we found like great community champions that led to local groups. And it's not us necessarily creating them, it's just finding out where their needs are and then trying to be there to provide some of those needs. And so that's like one side of the coin, would be like really engaging on this local level to like build that capacity where we can. And then I also think we're trying to, at the same time, create this like larger like statewide atmosphere where that kind of work can actually happen. And to illustrate that, like one thing we're really trying to champion right now is making sure that Wyoming applies for and receives $70 million for the home energy rebate program, which is a lot of money for low income. Most of you know what this is. And it would be really beneficial to every community in Wyoming. And then we could show up and have those conversations again of like, oh, well, your neighbor did this. Like, can we, could you chat with them and see how that worked for them? What is a heat pump? Like, how do we do this with contractors? How do we address our workforce? And so we're also trying to have those conversations so that when communities do want to chase after this, or individuals, that there's actually a climate there for them to step into. And yeah, it's been really a good journey, and we continue to work on it. And I think if people have questions, or you're excited for what's going on in your own community, want to share what worked for you, like I would love to connect after this and share information and like stay in contact. And one thing I did want to circle back on this relationship piece is I'm finding also more and more often, yes, like sometimes we'll show up as consultants and talk through all these high level things, but more and more often I'm finding that if we can just connect the right individuals, and maybe we facilitate a meeting of, oh, here's a city planner from this place, and let's connect them to the person up in Billings who just did this. Like that kind of like peer-to-peer relationship can be really beneficial, leads to future partnerships, leads to, all of a sudden they're working on a grant together, and then, it's like, oh, great, the work is just snowballing itself. So just wanted to touch on that as well.
Yeah.
And I will say that is an amazing thing that comes out of this conference.
Totally.
I went to the first one in 2019, and after that, there was a Mountain Towns ICLEI cohort that was created to do greenhouse gas emissions reports for all of our communities. And it was the first time we all had worked together, and the first time most of us had worked with ICLEI, and it all came out of this. So this is another great example of that.
Yeah, our organization was founded because of the original Mountain Towns event. So yeah, pretty exciting. I have one more question, and then I think we'll go to the group. And I've saved the spiciest for last. This is an issue I've encountered in my own climate advocacy work at the local level, and it's illustrated by an article in our local paper this morning, which is a fabulous paper, by the way. Our local paper reported this morning that a Wyoming State Legislative Task Force is seeking to restrict fees that our county and town charge for development, and also to preempt our local ability to impose development moratoriums. They may or may not pass. Just because there's legislation doesn't mean it will pass. But the specter of preemption looms. It's real. It tempers, I think, some of the decisions that electeds are willing to make. I am curious, especially you, Courtney and Andrew, because I don't know if you encounter the same thing in your work in Idaho. Is preemption a real threat to progress on climate issues in our red states? And if so, do you have any thoughts as to how to avoid preemption?
Let's take a poll. Who here thinks that preemption is a hurdle to climate change in your red state? Yes, I feel like it's a bit of a gimme. It is, unfortunately, has become severely polarized, climate change, and we've talked about that a lot today. Like I said, there are counties in Idaho that are banning renewable energy on private land, which totally goes against the whole small government property rights argument, right? But it has become such a polarized issue that the sight of a solar panel or a windmill makes people think that Biden is knocking at their door, and they don't like that. And so, it kind of all goes back to the conversation, the triple bottom line, right? And how do we relay the problems that we're facing because of climate change, while maybe not mentioning climate change because it is such an issue. We have, our state legislature has created a ban on banning plastic bags. So they took the time to ban a ban so that we couldn't decide whether or not we wanted people to be able to have plastic bags in our grocery store. So we are very much not in control of our own communities and the efforts that are being made on climate change at a large scale in our states. But there are small things that we can do, and I think we are able to set our water rates, and we have tiered water rates so that the lower income people with smaller homes that use less water pay much less than the large second homes that water acres of lawn that we don't want to see. And so that we can make these small tweaks at the local level that do make a difference. I mean, I think the number one thing that you all can do that is the theme of the weekend, right, or the week or whatever, wherever we are, is to vote. I have been, for a while, I was the only council person on my council fighting for climate change, and the rest of the council cared about it, but I was really sticking my neck out to try to make a change, even in our local, very blue town, right? And so I think, our efforts would be in a totally different place if we had 4 people really pounding the pavement to make those changes at the local level. And sure, yeah, we would continue to be met with hurdles at the state level. I think that will always be an issue for us. I think we're similar. I think we have a handful of Democrats among hundreds of Republicans at the state legislature, and it's very hard to bridge that gap. But I think there are ways to do it in terms of how you frame the conversation. Like I said at the beginning, we all care about Idaho. We all care about being able to swim in our rivers and breathe our air and hunt in the hills or whatever it is. And how do we kind of come back to that common place and find ways to make solutions in that area. But it's tough, and you're hitting your head against a brick wall a lot of the time, and it can get really exhausting. But I think that's, it's great that we're all here, and I think helping to build community and share solutions and do everything that we can at the local level is a great thing.
Andrew, any insights from the front lines?
Yeah, I certainly going up from Courtney and up to the state level, I think we all recognize and are somewhat shocked and saddened by the irony of this, from a local to state level, but more the irony lies within the state to the national level. I sit here and think about the bills or legislations we're passing, and when I walk the hallways of Cheyenne, all they say is we don't want Washington in our backyard. And what are we turning around doing? Certainly some of the bills we're turning around and putting Cheyenne in the backyards of the communities in Wyoming. So, in thinking about this concept, I think what really came to the forefront of the thought was words and timing matter. And if we are talking about, certain local decisions that are being made, and the timing of them compounds with maybe the scheduling of that meeting that just happened, or an adjoining town that's also using the word moratorium, that's just unfortunate luck, I would say, but that does fuel that fire. And I think that is a strategy that certainly councils and commissions can try to task some of their staff with, and try to pursue these items that might be more controversial when legislators are not paying attention. And it's not being sneaky. It's just the reality of when these things all come together. The committee we're talking about is a regulatory reduction. It's a task force, and it was really came about because of the energy industry. It has, of course, morphed into something about housing and local communities and moratoriums and a number of different items that have to do with housing. But we kind of, some of my colleagues, good colleagues, that are one of the few Democrats in the Senate, did a very good job of kind of diverting it last session and making it go away. Well, it's obviously reared its head again, and it's back in front of us. But I think that timing and words matter. So if we can attempt to including the paper, if we can attempt to have these conversations, not going into a heated next session, or maybe in the spring, not in an election cycle, there might be more success where this preemption might not be as prevalent. I mean, obviously this sounds like wishful thinking, but the solution in my book is, try not to put a target on your back by using certain words. And I think something I really picked up on earlier, I mean, you want to get in and get down to the nitty gritty of an R at the state of Wyoming, talk about the economic impact. Talk about how that could help them. Don't talk about the negatives. Talk about how that, whatever the topic might be, could help them. Or, put it back on them. How does this decision in Teton County affect you in Lusk? You didn't even know this was a problem. So let's just work on this and have a discussion. And obviously it's easy for me to say being an R down there, but I think that I think timing and words matter as it relates to this, and it is something that I think we all struggle with. At least I do, and those that are thoughtful in my body, because we don't want to be told what to do, but we certainly seem to at times want to flex and tell others what to do that are sitting at the county or at town level.
Yeah. Oh, so much great insights. Thank you to all of you. I want to open it up to you all. We welcome your questions, your comments, your solutions.
Any questions?
I will also just say, while she's passing the mic, that all of you have amazing ideas and are doing amazing work in red states on this work. And so, we're a very small perspective of this, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to unite all of us and to share these ideas, because it is hard, but I think there is an amazing sharing of ideas that's happening, and there's amazing work happening in all of these states on the climate front. And so I think that's a really wonderful thing. Go for it.
I work for a city in a red state. We are a very known city in that red state as being highly progressive. And so I'm hearing these ideas of talk about the things that the people you're talking to will care about. And I'm thinking okay, well, they're gonna know what I care about when I come into those conversations. And I could see how if I don't address that right away, it could come across as inauthentic or ungenuine. And I was just wondering if you all had experienced that, or have any ideas about how to talk about what other folks care about, but in a way that is honestly building that relationship with them.
Yeah, I think I can speak to this, and then certainly try to be quick and hand it off. I mean, we deal with it in our body, right? I'm viewed as certainly have an R behind my name, but a lot of people view me as not an R, and that's just fine. I'm perfectly accepting of that. But when I have those conversations with colleagues that certainly know what county I'm coming from and certainly know where I land on a topic or a bill, I'll go back to kind of my first comment at the beginning of the session is, if I have the chance to try to quickly do a Google or quickly check out their legislative profile or think about their community. If they're coming from the eastern side of the state, they probably don't care about the ski season. So if you are in a legislative setting as someone that works for a town or a city in a red state, and you are engaging with an elected, it's not always possible, and I acknowledge that, but try to have a base map for where they, you got to try to, analyze your competition, if you will, and then genuinely try. I mean, you might not be successful, right? I mean, I think that's the reality of it is you have to be willing to have a failure there. But I think the more times you try, and maybe my fellow panelists will agree with this, the more opportunities you'll gain that confidence, and you can genuinely have that conversation where you can find the common ground of the Red Sox, or, oh man, both of our aunts went to the same college, something like that. And I think that does help to begin to make it more authentic. But certainly, I accept that some of those conversations in my work are just going to be a roadblock.
Yeah, and I think there's also a layer too of like, I think you should always own your own space, right? Like if you're like, well, we looked at this science, this helped inform the decision, like if they already know you're coming with that direction, like you can own that. And I would always circle back to like what you know about community values and or problems that were stated. And that's this like community narrative piece, like, oh yeah, well, we're doing this. Yes, it does cut emissions. Like we're not pretending that it doesn't, but we're doing this because we heard that housing was a real problem and that it was really uncomfortable for a lot of residents on this part of town. And so like we really worked hard to address that with this retrofit program. And yes, there is a larger piece, but we did this to serve our community. And I would just bring it right back to that local level. And these like larger discussions, like we could have a political debate on this and it would probably get pretty spicy. But if we just stay focused on like serving people, it becomes a lot easier to be like, well, we did what we could with the resources we had, and we made it with the best information that was available to us.
Yeah, I think what I'll say is a combo of those two. I think understanding who you're talking to and recognizing that they're also a person who's trying to do a good thing. I think as someone who's an elected official, and I know there's lots of them in the room, we get a lot of comments that are very disparaging and cruel and inhumane. And I'm doing the best that I can. I'm here to serve my community. I'm not making millions. It's not the most thankful job in the world. And I think acknowledging that the person on the other side also feels that way, right? They may have a very different perspective from you, but they're trying to serve their community. And I think starting off with that and saying, thank you for your service. I'm grateful that you're a part of the conversation and that you're trying to help the community goes a long way. Because I think if you come out of the gates hot, it's easy to just throw up the blocker, and then there's no ability to have that conversation. And so I think, step one is acknowledge that there's a human on the other side. And step two, I would say, is that there's power in numbers, and you can't always have that, but that's what we found with our Resort Cities Coalition is, part of the reason I wanted that to be a group and not just the city of Ketchum is because I knew that if the city of Ketchum had a lobbyist at the state legislature, everything we said would get shut down without a conversation, right? But if 19 cities from the state of Idaho, big and small and all across the state, are coming and saying this is a real concern for us, then they have to listen. And it also gives us access to a lot more legislators in the work that we're doing. And so there is a lot of power in uniting and demonstrating that, yeah, you may be one person, but you're a part of a movement, you're a part of a group, and this is a bigger issue than just you.
Right.
I think I might be next. So my question is kind of framed around like career development as an individual in a red state. So bear with me because it might be a spicy question. But in more recent years, living and working on sustainability, working in local government, and being a young woman in a red state, it's felt as though the place that I call home has been asking me to become smaller or do less within all of those identities. It makes me worry about the longevity of myself and those working in these situations within the field because there's not much celebration of this work or these intersections. What gives you hope, optimism, vision, or pride for the future of this workforce in an increasingly challenging and polarized and or cult-like environment in these states?
I'll do a quick answer, and you may or may not find it adequate, but it's like this,
Yeah.
right? You may be isolated day in, day out, but seeking out opportunities to band it. In addition to attending this event, WALK constituted a monthly call of advocates, and we get together on Zoom monthly and talk about what we're working on and have a chance to look at people who are like-minded and working on stuff. So if that is your day-to-day existence, and it can be tough and challenging, like finding opportunities to find those communities and may require a little bit of work, but hopefully the kinds of stuff we're seeing here gives rise to some of those new communities and partnerships.
And I think I can add, I love what you're saying, like the community piece is, I think, a lot of that, and it's hope versus despair, and there's a lot of really great authors out there, which I can share a few of them later. But I would also illustrate like one piece of learning that I had, it's been like developing over the past few years, is like anytime you have some sort of event or a workplace, like we have to find ways where we can celebrate this work together, and that is really, really hard to do. And it's really depressing when you look at the numbers, and that makes me want to throw up my hands and give up. But if we like end a community gathering and then we're like, hey, we're all gonna go, we're already at this place, let's go grab a drink, or let's go do a bonfire, or let's like do this humanizing aspect, where all of a sudden these are like your people that you're like doing this like life thing together, and it becomes a lot less hard. And if you get too focused on the project, like we have to do that project or we've done nothing, like you building that community and having conversations is doing meaningful work. And so there's some shifting there, and a lot of good authors out there on this subject, and it's really hard.
And I was talking to someone about this yesterday who was saying, gosh, I see these job postings at these sustainability firms in big cities, and how fun would it be to just work on this huge team of people doing amazing sustainability work and surrounded by people who really care about this, and I'm like at this organization like trying to like push the rock uphill, right? And but you have so much more value where you are. I hate to say that because I know how hard it is, but imagine if you weren't there. And I think we're so lucky to have the people who are in these isolated positions, trying to steer this giant ship. And I think community is what's gonna keep us all in it and keep us all feeling positive in this really challenging and often depressing work. But at the end of the day, you will have so much better professional experience because you will have had to be so creative and gotten so good at communication. It's really easy to tell somebody who is all in on climate change that they need to buy an electric car, and they buy an electric car, and that's that. But when you're facing a hostile council or whatever, and you're trying to convey the benefits and the values of spending $10,000 extra on a car, you gain a lot from that, and it's hard, but I think that is professional development that you're learning on the job and that you can take with you in the next place, and you'll be better at problem solving and better at communicating and better at doing this work. And so I think, where you are, you're gaining incredible career development, and then it's just a matter of finding hope, finding mentors, and I think this is an amazing community for that. I know someone asked me the difference between this conference and the first one, which was the last, I haven't been to the last two, in Park City, and I said, the biggest difference is that there's all these young people who have sustainability jobs. And it's so cool. And, I think we didn't have any sustainability positions at our county or in any of our cities when I went to the first one. Now we have two. And all the other cities that are here have also gained that. And so there is a much bigger pool for sustainability jobs, and they're being filled by young people, and it's really cool and it's really inspiring, and I'm really proud to be a part of it and happy to help anyone. I don't have a lot to offer, but I think just having a community makes a big difference.
Sweet.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
I would just like to say I'm sure you have a lot to offer. So I'm with the Collective Clean Energy Fund. We have a table over there, and we're a nonprofit community lender investment fund. And we've previously been in Colorado only, and then now we anticipate some funding from the GGRF National Clean Investment Fund, $136 million. And we're also now the designated green bank for EPA Region 8, which includes Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas, and 28 tribal nations within those states. And so I'm wondering, my question is kind of twofold. How or do you see financing as a barrier to climate action in these red states? And what would your advice be? Because we feel, I think collectively at our organization, like there it's a hurdle. Like in Colorado, it has been very easy. It's been like going down the slopes, and it feels like in these other states that we now need to deploy a lot of capital in, that there's an element of convincing. And so any advice or insight that you have about how we get people to spend money in a good way is appreciated.
I mean, quickly on wear my legislator hat, I think that, and it was touched on a little bit, but having a voice, in Cheyenne, and I think that there's an opportunity there to, contract lobbyists that's part-time that can help educate, right? If you're new to the state, trying to have someone that's boots on the ground, because one voice with a certain title and a certain says green energy in the title or whatever it might say, words matter, but having a lobbyist there that can promote some sort of that financing to get the word out, I think is really important. But I think you're probably talking more on a local level, so I think it's important for other panelists to answer it on a local level and project level.
Yeah, so one of the challenges of red states is that we don't have our own taxing authority. So, that is one of the benefits of Colorado, is that they can go to the voters and do a sustainability tax and get it approved, and we are very limited. The only option we have is local option tax, which is consistently being threatened. And so we are very limited in our ability to raise funds for these projects. It's just bulked into our general fund and our general operating expenses. So, the same money that we use to plow streets is the money that we use for sustainability projects. And so you have to do a lot of cost benefit analysis and explaining, why it's okay to spend this extra amount of money on something that's more green, because we're competing for a smaller amount of dollars. But I think that one of the ways that I've found is gets people a lot more excited to contribute is when there's matching funds. So, the city, we're working right now to put solar panels on our new LEED certified fire station, which was built a couple years ago. It's solar ready, but we didn't have enough money to put solar panels on it. So we're trying to cross that bridge, and trying to figure out the capital funding stack. And there's a few grants, but there's still a gap, right? And I think I can get my council to put a match up, but I don't know if they can do the whole chunk. And so, is there an opportunity for someone to come in and say, okay, we will match your dollars 2 for 1 or 1 for 1 or 5 for 1 or whatever it is to help us feel like we're leveraging our dollars and getting more out of them. Makes a big difference for small communities like ours that have strapped budgets.
Yeah, and one last, and I see we're out of town, but I know in Wyoming, for example, I'm guessing it's the case in other states as well. We do have statewide associations of counties and municipalities, and ours is Wyoming County Commissioners Association and Wyoming Association of Municipalities. And I think connecting with an organization like that, their directors will be like in tune and in touch with the political tenor and probably priorities of their member organizations, and it might be a one-stop shop for dissemination of information and resources. So that might be a way to go as well. Folks, I'm sorry we didn't have more time for Q&A, but I hope this will spur conversations between each other, and I'm guessing these wonderful panelists would be willing to stay a little bit beyond to answer questions and engage in conversation. We wish you all luck. I think we've aired some great ideas, and I want to echo, I do personally think we have so much opportunity for success, especially at the local level. And then we have hope, given that we have people like Andrew in the legislature and people who are really just citizens trying to do the right thing, that we can just continue to try to make connections with. So best of luck, and we look forward to hearing success stories when we circle back together next year. Thank you.